Reuben Pickett had spent 14 months sleeping in a 1994 Buick LeSabre that did not belong to him, and on the morning of February 14, 2017, at 9:17 sharp, he stood on the granite steps of the Bertie County Courthouse in Windsor, North Carolina, holding a single sheet of paper that said the train depot at Tarwell was now his. The paper shook in his hand, not from cold. From the fact that nothing had ever been his before. The clerk inside had counted his 10 $1 bill twice. Then she had stamped the deed and slid it across the counter without looking up, because in Bertie County on a Tuesday in February, a tax sale was a small kind of mercy nobody bothered to dress up. He folded the paper into quarters and put it in the inside pocket of his work jacket. The jacket had a hole at the right elbow from oil and from wear. He stood there a long minute, watching a truck pull out of the lot. Then another. A woman in a red coat walked past him on the sidewalk and did not look at him, and Reuben Pickett was used to that, had been used to that since his mother died, and for 14 months he had carried the feeling that the part of him she used to see had been buried with her at the cemetery off Highway 17 where the grass came up sparse over the cheap concrete marker the church had paid for. But the courthouse steps came at the end. The beginning had been a Tuesday in December, 14 months back, in a hospital corridor that smelled of bleach and burnt coffee and the floor wax they used at Vidant Bertie Hospital, where Felicia Pickett, age 39, died of a hemorrhagic stroke at 3:14 in the morning, while her son sat in a vinyl chair 2 rooms away and waited for someone to tell him it would be all right. Nobody told him. A nurse came out at 3:31 and said his mother was gone. She said it gently. She said it the way you say something to a person you have decided is too young to be hearing it, and she put her hand on his shoulder and left it there for 2 seconds before she moved away, because there were other things she had to do at 3:31 in the morning at a hospital in eastern North Carolina. Reuben sat in the vinyl chair another 40 minutes. The corridor was very quiet. A man in scrubs walked past once. The vending machine on the far wall kicked on and off, the way old machines do. He drove home in his mother's Buick LeSabre, which had not run right since 2011 but ran. He let himself into the apartment on Walnut Street where rent was $740 a month, and his mother had paid it for 18 years working 2 jobs, the night shift at the hospital running a mop and the day shift at her kitchen table running a Singer sewing machine that her own mother had given her in 1980. He sat down at the kitchen table. He did not turn on the light. He put his hands flat on the surface where his mother had hemmed pants and sewn buttons for people in the neighborhood at $4 a button, and he did not cry. He had not cried in front of her, and he was not going to start now that she was not there to be embarrassed by it. The funeral cost $4,200 Reuben did not have. Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church, where his mother had not been a regular member, but where the choir director had known her since they were 9 years old in elementary school, took up a collection that came to $1,800. Pastor Wendell Boatwright, 78 years old then, drove Reuben back to the apartment after the burial and made him eat a plate of collard greens and ham hocks that Mrs. Boatwright had put together at the church kitchen that morning. Pastor Wendell did not say much. He just sat at the kitchen table while Reuben ate, and when Reuben was done, he said, "You call me, son." Reuben nodded. He did not call. He never called. 3 months later, he could not make rent. He sold his mother's sewing machine for $90 to a woman who had a daughter learning to quilt. He sold the kitchen table for $30. He kept the Singer scissors, which had been his grandmother's, and his mother's Timex wristwatch with the cracked face, which she had worn since 2003 and never replaced because she said the crack was where time had decided to stop being polite about itself. He kept 3 shirts, 1 pair of work boots, the work jacket, and a paperback copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God that had belonged to his mother and that he had not yet finished reading. 14 months in the Buick. The Buick did not belong to him in any legal sense. It had belonged to his great-uncle Earl on his mother's side, a man Reuben had met twice in his life, and Earl had died in 2014 and the title had never been transferred because the lawyer's fee was $60 and nobody had $60, and the Buick had just continued to exist parked behind the Walnut Street apartment, used occasionally for grocery runs. After Reuben lost the apartment in March of 2016, he started sleeping in it, and he moved the seat back as far as it would go. He kept a blanket. He kept the window cracked an inch even January because of the carbon monoxide his mother had warned him about when he was 8 years old. He slept in the church parking lot on the nights Pastor Wendell knew he was there, which was 3 nights a week, and on the other 4 he slept behind the public library or in the lot behind the Family Dollar where the manager was a man named Linwood Beasley, who had gone to school with Felicia and who looked the other way. He showered at the YMCA in Windsor. $4 a session twice a week. He worked part-time at a garage off Highway 13 changing oil and rebuilding small engines for a man named Bobby Coley, who paid him cash $60 a day 3 days a week. He ate 1 real meal a day. He read at the library between 9 and 6. The librarian, a woman named Patricia Lyles, never asked him to leave. She knew. Everyone in Tarwell knew. Bertie County had 17,000 people in 2016 and 4 traffic lights, and a young man living in a Buick did not stay a secret. $43. That was what was in his wallet on the morning of February 7, 2017, when Pastor Wendell Boatwright found him sitting at the long oak table in the public library, reading a 1962 edition of Black Reconstruction by W.E.B. Du Bois that the library still kept because Patricia Lyles thought it ought to be kept. Pastor Wendell sat down across from him. He had a folded piece of newsprint in his hand. He set it on the table between them and slid it across. "There's a building going up for $10 next week," he said. Reuben read the notice. Tax sale, Bertie County, February 14, 2017. Lot 7B, Tarwell Township, former Atlantic Coastline Depot, upset bid minimum. $10, he said. Not a question, a flat word. Pastor Wendell folded his hands together on the table. He took a long time before he answered. He had the habit of folding his handkerchief in his pocket into a precise small square before he said anything difficult, and Reuben watched him do it now. Take it out, smooth it on his knee, fold it once, fold it twice, and put it back. "Because I think the man who used to own it would have wanted you to," he said. "What man?" "His name was Hollis Green. He died 3 years ago. I knew him 40 years. I never met him." "No," Pastor Wendell said, "you didn't." He did not say anything else. He did not explain who Hollis Green was. He did not say why a dead man Reuben had never met would want him to own a building. He just sat there with his hands folded on the library table while Reuben looked at the newsprint, and after a while Patricia Lyles came by with the cart and asked if either of them wanted coffee, and Pastor Wendell said, "No thank you, ma'am," and Reuben said no, and Patricia moved on. A week later, Reuben drove the Buick out to Tarwell. He had not been there since he was small. His mother had not driven him out in 20 years. The town was 8 miles south of Windsor, on a road that ran past peanut fields, and a tobacco barn nobody used anymore, and a Pentecostal church that had burned in 1998 and never been rebuilt. The depot stood at the south end of the town, where the rails used to cross Sycamore Road, and the rails had been pulled up in 1989, but the bed was still there, raised 3 feet above the field, a long straight line of crushed stone running off into the pines. He pulled the Buick onto the gravel apron in front of the building. He sat for a minute with the engine off. The cold was the kind of February cold that had no wind in it. The building was red brick, 1 story, long, with a corrugated tin roof gone the color of dried blood. The ticket window had an octagonal iron grill. The platform ran the length of the south side. The boards rotted at the far end. Kudzu had climbed the wall on the south end of the building and reached for the eaves and stopped there, frozen for the season. On the door, somebody had spray-painted a single word "close" in white paint in 1987, and the paint was still there, faded gray now, and nobody had bothered to either remove it or to actually close the door because Reuben tried the handle and the door swung in. It had been unlocked for 3 years. No one had bothered to lock something nobody wanted. He stepped over the threshold. Cold wood air. Dust. The smell of pine boards that had been wet and dried for half a century. He stood inside the door and let his eyes adjust. The waiting room ran the width of the building, 20 feet by 30, with a high ceiling and 2 long benches of dark wood pushed against the walls. A pot-belly stove squatted in the corner, rust through the door. The ticket window was set into the partition that divided the waiting room from the agent's office, and behind the iron grill the wooden counter ran 10 feet long, and on the counter sat a brass bell with a button on top, tarnished black. Reuben walked the room slowly. He ran his hand along the bench. The wood was solid. He pressed his palm against the brick wall, and it was cold and dry. He walked behind the partition into the agent's office. There was a roll-top desk shoved against the back wall, rolled down and locked. There was a swivel chair with one wheel missing. There was a wooden cabinet of small drawers labeled in faded ink. Tickets manifest, wire, schedule, other. The schedule board on the wall still had a yellowed paper card pinned to it that read effective June 12, 1985. The freight room ran off the east end of the agent's office. A platform scale sat in the middle of the floor, 2,000-pound capacity. The dial face cracked. The telegrapher's nook was a small alcove on the west wall, 3 feet wide, with a high stool and a shelf for the key. And the key was gone. He stood at the ticket window. He put his hands flat on the wooden counter on the agent's side. The counter was oak, 2 inches thick, smooth from 100 years of arms resting on it. The bell tarnished beside his left hand, the window grill in front of him. Beyond the grill, the empty waiting room and the rectangle of pale February light coming through the window where his Buick sat parked on the gravel. For the first time in 14 months, he was inside a building that was his. He did not know yet what the building was. He sat down on the floor behind the counter, his back against the wood. He pulled his knees up. He put his hands over his face. He stayed like that for a long time. He did not cry. But something in him went quiet that had been loud for 14 months, and when he stood back up, the light coming through the south window had moved an inch across the floor, and he understood that an inch was a beginning. He walked through every room again. He counted the windows, 11. He counted the doors, 4. He pulled at the roll-top desk, and it was locked, but the wood was solid. He opened the small drawers in the wooden cabinet one at a time. Tickets was empty. Manifest held 3 brittle pages of carbon copy from 1984. Wire had a chewed pencil. Schedule had a 1986 timetable. Other had a single brass key on a leather fob, label half worn off, the letters HG still visible in pencil. He held the key. He turned it in the light. The fob was cracked leather, the brass key small enough for a desk drawer or a small lock. He put it in his pocket. He walked back to the ticket window. He stood on the public side, looking through the grill at the counter, the way a passenger would have stood in 1962 buying a ticket to Norfolk. He let his eyes go along the edge of the counter where the wood met the partition, and there, at the bottom of the wood 4 inches above the floor, just under the lip of the counter, where a customer would not see it, but where a man sitting on the high stool behind the counter would see it every day of his working life, somebody had cut 3 small letters into the oak with a pocket knife. HG. 41247. The letters were small. The cuts were deep. The wood around the cuts had darkened from 68 years of palm oil and dust. Reuben Pickett crouched down and put his thumb on the carving and did not move for a full minute. He did not know yet who HG was. He went back the next morning. He had spent the night in the Buick parked at Mount Olive, and Pastor Wendell had brought him a thermos of coffee at 6 and had not asked what he had found. Reuben had said only, "I'm going back today." Pastor Wendell had nodded. He went through the building inch by inch. He started with the agent's office and worked outward. Those top desk would not open without a key he did not have, but the small key from the other drawer fit none of the locks he could see. He set it aside on the counter. He took the leather fob and laid it next to the bell. He looked at the dust on the counter where his elbows had rested the day before. He looked at the way the dust had been disturbed in only one rectangle along the right side of the counter, a rectangle about a foot wide and 2 feet long where, decades ago, somebody had set down a ledger or a notebook day after day for years until the wood beneath had a slightly paler color than the wood around it. The man who had worked here had been right-handed. He had kept his book in the same place every day. He had done it for a long, long time. Reuben sat down on the high stool behind the counter. He pulled it under him. He looked through the iron grill at the waiting room. He put his hands on the counter the way the man before him would have put them. He understood, sitting there, that the building was not empty. The building was holding something. He did not know what. He spent 2 hours opening the cabinet of small drawers and pulling them all the way out and looking at the wood behind them. He found a pencil from 1979 with the eraser intact. He found a piece of carbon paper with a freight manifest legible on it. 3 crates, peaches, Tarwell to Norfolk, July 1981. He found a postcard, blank, from somewhere in Florida, never mailed. He pulled out the last drawer, the deep one at the bottom, and the drawer would not come out. He looked. He felt around the slides. The drawer was stuck. He pulled harder. The drawer rattled but did not move. He got down on his back on the floor and shone his phone light up under the cabinet from below. 4 screws, long, rusted, set deep into the wood at 4 corners of the drawer slide, driven in from underneath the cabinet so that the drawer could not be pulled out ever, without removing the entire cabinet from the wall. Somebody had sealed this drawer shut, not locked, sealed. Reuben slid out from under the cabinet and sat on the floor. He looked at the back of the cabinet and at the way the screws had been put in. They were 3-inch screws, rusted now, the head still showing the 4-pointed star of an old Phillips drive. They had been there a long time. He could not tell how long, but the rust pattern said decades. He stood up. He did not have a drill. He did not have a screw extractor. He did not have anyone to call who would come and not ask questions. He stood at the counter and looked at the bell and at the carving HG 41247 under the lip, and he understood that whoever had sealed that drawer had done it on purpose, and had done it from outside the cabinet, and had wanted whatever was inside to stay inside until someone with the right reason came to open it. He did not know if he was that someone. He drove back into Windsor and went to the post office. The post office in Tarwell had closed in 2009, but the small clapboard building on Main Street was still there, painted white once and now a kind of soft gray, and Augusta Brim was inside it on most weekday afternoons because she had been postmistress for 28 years, and she did not know what else to do with herself. And the new postmaster who came down from Williamston twice a week did not mind because Miss Augusta kept the place tidy. She was sitting behind the counter when he came in. She had a pair of reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a green cardigan over a yellow blouse, and her hair was white and short and combed back. She looked up when the bell over the door rang. She looked at Reuben for 4 full seconds without saying anything. Then she said, "You look just like your mama." Reuben stood in the doorway. He did not move. The bell behind him had gone still. He had not heard a person say something like that about him in 14 months. The last person who had said it had been Pastor Wendell in December of 2015, looking at Felicia Pickett in her coffin and saying it to nobody in particular. "Come in here," Miss Augusta said. "Don't stand in the door, heat's running." He came in. He stood at the counter. She put down her pen and folded her hands. "What's your name, child?" "Reuben." "Reuben who?" "Reuben Pickett, ma'am." She nodded once. She did not look surprised. She looked the way people look when something they have been waiting on for a long time arrives and they do not want to make it bigger than it is by reacting. "How old are you?" 20. "You hungry?" He hesitated. He had eaten a granola bar at 6. It was 1/4 noon. "Yes, ma'am." She put a closed sign on the door and locked it. She took him through a back room to a side stair that went up to a small apartment over the post office where she had lived since 1976. She fed him chicken and rice from a covered pot on the stove and a square of cornbread and a glass of sweet tea, and she did not ask him a single question until he was done eating. When he was done, she took the plate and washed it in the sink with her back to him and said, without turning around, "Your mama lived here in Tarwell until she was 11. Then her mama took her to Philadelphia. You knew that?" "No, ma'am." She said. She was from Norfolk. Norfolk was where they stopped a while on the way up. That's not where she was from. Miss Augusta turned the water off. She dried her hands on a dish towel. She turned around and leaned against the sink. "Your mama was a quiet child. She read books. She used to come in this every Saturday and ask if there was any mail for Felicia Green, and there wasn't, and she'd thank me and go home. Every Saturday for a year and a half. Green. That was her mama's name. Green, your grandmama. Your mama took your granddaddy's name later. Pickett. From up north. He was a Philadelphia man." She paused. "He didn't stay." "No, ma'am. I knew your grandmama. She was younger than me by 6 years. We were in school together when school was still segregated before they joined them up in 65. Her name was Della Green. She had 1 brother." Miss Augusta stopped. She looked at the dish towel in her hands. She folded it and set it on the counter. "His name was Hollis," she said. "Hollis Green. He worked the depot here 40 years. He died in 2014. Reuben did not move. "He was your grandmama's brother," Miss Augusta said, "which makes him your great-uncle. By blood, you understand me." He understood her, and he did not understand her at the same time. He sat at the small table in Miss Augusta's apartment over the closed-down Tarwell post office, and he heard the words and he heard them again, and the second time they did not arrive any clearer. "My mama never says," he said, "Bud. Your mama didn't know." "How come?" Miss Augusta sat down across from him. She put her hands on the table. "Because your grandmama left in 1948 and she was mad at her brother for staying," she said. "She wanted him to go up north with her. He stayed because his mom was sick. He stayed because the depot offered him a steady job. He stayed because he wanted to. And Della didn't forgive him for it. She didn't talk about him after she left. She didn't write to him. She raised your mama to think she didn't have any people down south. That's how some women do it. Some women cut what they can't carry." Reuben looked at the table, the grain of the wood, a small water ring near his right hand. "And he knew about me. He knew about you, child. He knew about your mama her whole life. He kept track. He had a friend at Mount Olive who kept him posted. Pastor Wendell. Pastor Wendell told him. Pastor Wendell told him for 30-something years." The room was very still. The clock on the kitchen wall said 12:46. "Why didn't he ever come find us?" Reuben said. Miss Augusta did not answer right away. She got up, she went to the cupboard and got down a tin and put it on the table and took the lid off. The tin had 3 slices of pound cake in it. She slid the tin toward him. "Eat," she said. "I'll tell you what I think, but I want to be clear it's what I think." Hollis Green did not tell me his reasons. He told my mama once, and my mama told me, and what she told me was that he believed your grandmama had the right to her decision. That if Della wanted Felicia to grow up without a South, then Hollis was not going to be the one to put one back into her life uninvited. He said it would be like calling a child out by a name she did not know belonged to her. He said sometimes the kindest thing a man can do is to wait. "Wait for what?" Miss Augusta looked at him a long moment. "For somebody to come to a building," she said, "when they were ready." Reuben drove back out to the depot that afternoon. The sky had turned the color of pewter, and the wind had come up out of the southwest. He parked the Buick and sat with the engine off for a long time. He looked at the building through the windshield, the kudzu, the faded paint of the word "closed," the octagonal grill. A man named Hollis Green had stood behind that grill for 40 years. The man had been his great-uncle. The man had known about him, the man had waited. Reuben got out of the Buick and walked up the platform and through the door. He stood in the waiting room. He went behind the counter. He sat on the high stool. He put his hands on the oak the way Hollis Green had put his hands on it for 40 years. He understood now what the sealed drawer was for. He just did not know yet how to open it. He came back the next morning with a borrowed drill from Bobby Coley at the garage. He had told Bobby he was opening up a building he had bought. Bobby had asked what kind of building. Reuben had said an old one. Bobby had handed him the drill without further questions, the way men of a certain kind hand other men of a certain kind tools. He spent 90 minutes on the drawer. The screws were so rusted they would not turn. He broke 2 bits. He stopped. He drove back into Windsor to the hardware store on Granville and bought a left-handed extractor bit for $11.95 and an oil can for $2.99. He drove back. He oiled the screw heads and let them sit for an hour. He drilled out the first screw at 6:42. In the evening, the light through the south window almost gone. The kerosene lamp Bobby had loaned him along with the drill burning on the counter. When the last screw came out, the drawer slid forward an inch on its own from the weight of what was inside. Reuben pulled the drawer the rest of the way, a ledger. Black leather binding, oxblood at the spine, the cover the size of a tabloid newspaper folded in half. The corners worn round. The spine cracked at 2 places. He lifted it out. It was heavy. 3 pounds, maybe 4. He set it on the counter under the kerosene lamp. He opened the cover, stamped in gold on the inside leaf, very faded. The words Atlantic Coastline Railroad Company, Daily Station Wrecker, Tarwell, NC. Below that, sent, careful, hand in pencil, sent, Station Wayne 36, January 1986, May 1986. Reuben turned a page, columns, date, train number, scheduled arrival, passengers boarding, passengers detraining, freight loaded, freight unloaded, remarks. The handwriting was small and even and slightly slanted, the letters carefully formed, the way a man writes when he was taught penmanship before the war. He turned another page. April 14, 1986. Train 49 northbound. On time. 2 passengers boarding for Norfolk. Freight. 6 crates, peanuts, Suffolk. Remarks frost overnight. Lost 2 weeks of redbud bloom. April 15. Train 49 northbound. Late 18 minutes. Light rain. April 16. Train 49 northbound. On time. 1 passenger. Freight. Empty. The handwriting was patient. The handwriting was a man's whole life. In the margin of the page for April 20, 1986, in pencil, in the same hand. Felicia's birthday. She is 19 years old today. Reuben stopped reading. He looked at the line for a long time. He turned more pages. April 21, 6. Train data, freight data. May 3, 1986. Train data, freight data. In the margin, last northbound passenger train. CSX merger announcement next month. The line will go to freight only. He turned to the last page. May 30, 1986. The final entry, the columns half empty, and at the bottom of the page, in pencil, whoever in the rest, sealed this book today. Will not be back to it. The next one lost to open it will know what to do. Reuben sat down on the high stool. He turned back to the inside front cover. Pressed flat against the leather, held in place by the leather flap that had been folded over to make a pocket, was a thick stack of envelopes. He pulled it out. He counted. 47. Each envelope hand-addressed in the same careful penmanship. Each envelope addressed not to a street, not to a city, just 2 words, to Felicia. The first envelope on top of the stack had a year in the upper right corner, 1979. The bottom envelope of the stack, when he gently turned the bundle over, said 2013. Reuben Pickett did not move for a long time. The kerosene lamp on the counter guttered once and steadied. Outside, the wind moved through the pines on the east side of the building, and the kudzu rasped against the south wall, and somewhere a long way off a dog barked twice and stopped. He had not opened the rest of the letters yet. He did open the first one. He did not read the rest that night. He sat on the high stool behind the counter, with the ledger closed in front of him and one folded letter in his hand, and he understood for the first time since the morning his mother died in the hospital corridor, that smelled of bleach and burnt coffee, that he had not been carrying his grief alone. Somebody else had been carrying it with him. Somebody else had been carrying it the whole time. He went to see Miss Augusta the next morning at the post office and told her what he had found. She listened. She did not say much. When he was done, she said, "Hollis used to talk about that book. He said it was the most honest thing he ever wrote because nobody ever read it. He said the truest things a man writes are the things he writes when he knows nobody will see them." She did not ask to see the letters. She said, "Those are for you, child." Reuben went back to the depot that afternoon, and he did not open the letters yet. He told himself he was not ready. He sat at the counter, and he turned the ledger to the page for April 20, 1986, and he read the line about his mother's 19th birthday again, and again and again, and after a while he put the ledger inside the deep drawer, and slid the drawer closed, and went home to the Buick at Mount Olive. He came back the third day with a notepad and a tape measure. He was going to need to know what he had if he was going to figure out what to do with it. He measured the waiting room. He measured the agent's office. He measured the freight room and the telegrapher's nook. He measured the platform. He wrote it all down. He made a list of what worked. Roof, mostly. Walls, yes. Floors, weak in 2 places. Windows, 6 of 11 cracked. Stove, ruined. Wiring, none. He was inside the freight room measuring the platform on scale at 1:20 in the afternoon when the front door of the depot opened and a man walked in who did not belong. The man was about 52. He wore a charcoal wool overcoat that had not been bought in Bertie County. His shoes had not been bought in Bertie County. His haircut had not been bought in Bertie County. He stood inside the waiting room looking around at the ceiling and at the floor and at the partition with the iron grill, and when he saw Reuben come out of the freight room, he smiled the way a man smiles when he has come somewhere for a specific reason, and the reason is now standing in front of him. "Mr. Pickett," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting. Who are you?" "Garrick Whitaker." The man held out a card. Reuben did not take it. The man set it on the brass bell on the counter. "I represent a development group based in Raleigh. Coastal Storage Holdings. We've been keeping an eye on this parcel for about 18 months. I was sorry to see it go to county sale before we could get to it. But I understand the high bid was $10. That's what I paid. Yes. That's remarkable price for a parcel this size with rail right-of-way access still intact. Even derelict, I think we both understand the building isn't really the asset here. The land is the asset. 2¼ acres on the old line bed, frontage on Sycamore Road. We'd like to make you an offer. I'm not selling." Garrick Whitaker smiled again. He had not stopped smiling. "You don't know what the offer is yet." "I don't need to. $40,000, Mr. Pickett. Cash, 14 days to close. That's a 4,000 times return on your investment. I would suggest you think about it." Reuben looked at him. He looked at the wool overcoat. He looked at the card on the brass bell. He thought about the line in the margin of the ledger. "Felicia's birthday. She is 19 years old today." "I'll think about it," he said, "but I don't think the answer is going to change." Whitaker nodded slowly. He looked around the room one more time. He looked at the iron grill of the ticket window. He looked at the high stool behind the counter. "Buildings like this aren't built for people like you, Mr. Pickett," he said. He said it pleasantly. He said it the way a man says something he has been waiting to say. "They're built for people like the ones who built them. Take a week. Think about it." He left. The Lincoln Navigator outside the door was black with North Carolina plates and dealer trim from a Raleigh dealership. It pulled out of the gravel and turned north on Sycamore Road. Reuben stood in the waiting room. He looked at the card on the bell. He picked it up. Coastal Storage Holdings, Garrick L. Whitaker, Acquisitions. He put it down. He walked behind the counter. He sat on the high stool. He opened the deep drawer. He took out the ledger. He turned to the page for April 20, 1986. He read it again. He closed the ledger and set it on the counter. He had not opened the rest of the letters yet. That night he drove out to Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church at 6:40 in the evening. The choir was practicing in the sanctuary. He waited in the parking lot until the practice was done and the cars pulled out one by one, and then he walked around to the side door that led to Pastor Wendell's small office. Pastor Wendell was at his desk reading the Bertie ledger advance. He looked up. He did not look surprised. "I wondered when you were coming," he said. "Sit down, son." Reuben sat in the wooden chair across from the desk. "You knew Hollis Green," he said. 41 years, Pastor Wendell said. He folded the newspaper and set it aside. "We were both deacons at the old Tarwell AME church before it closed in '88, and the congregation came down here. He was on the building committee. I was on the finance committee. We didn't agree about anything except that the roof needed fixing. We argued about it for a decade. He won most of the arguments because he was right most of the time. He was my great-uncle. He was. Miss Augusta told me. I figured she would, but she held it longer than I would have. You knew about me, too." Pastor Wendell took the handkerchief out of his pocket. He smoothed it on his knee. He folded it once. He folded it twice. He put it back. "I knew about you, son. I told Hollis when you were born. I told him when your daddy left. I told him about your mama when she got sick. I told him when she died. I went to the nursing home in Edenton in March of '14, and I told him in person, and a week later he was gone. Why didn't he come find me?" He thought about it. He thought about it the whole time. He told me once, about 6 years before he died, he said, "Wendell, the girl grew up thinking she didn't have anybody down here. If I show up now, it's not a gift I'm giving her, it's a debt I'm asking her to carry. She doesn't owe me anything." That's what he says. "My mama is dead. I know. I'm not my mama." Pastor Wendell looked at him. "No, son," he said. "You're not. And that's why I told you about the tax sale." "You didn't tell me he was my uncle." "I didn't tell you because Hollis wanted you to come to a building, not to a man. He thought if you came to a building first, the rest could come at the pace you set." Reuben sat with that for a long time. The office was quiet. The choir room down the hall was empty now. Outside, a truck went by on Highway 13 and faded into the distance. How did he know I'd come? Pastor Wendell smiled just barely. "He didn't," he said. "He hoped. He left it set up so that if you came, the door would open. If you didn't, the building would go to somebody else and the rest would go with it. That was the deal he made with himself. He said a gift you have to chase a man down to give him isn't a gift, it's a burden. He set the door open and let it be your choice." Reuben looked at the wall above Pastor Wendell's shoulder. There was a framed picture of the Mount Olive Choir in 1991, a row of older men and women in robes. He could not pick out his mother. She would have been 24 then. She had not gone to Mount Olive that year. "Pastor," he said, "what was in those letters?" Pastor Wendell shook his head slowly. "I never read them, son," he said. "I never asked. Those were between Hollis and a woman he had decided to love from across a long distance for 46 years. Whatever's in them belongs to you now. But it doesn't belong to me. It never did." Reuben sat in the chair. He held his hands together in his lap. "I don't know if I'm ready to read them," he said. "You're not," Pastor Wendell said. "But that's all right. They've waited this long. They'll wait a little longer." He stood up. He walked around the desk. He put his hand on Reuben's shoulder, the way he had put his hand on Reuben's shoulder at the funeral. And he kept it there longer this time, and he said, "Son, whatever else is true in this world, this is true. You were not alone. You were never alone. You just didn't know it." Reuben nodded once. He drove back to the depot. He sat on the high stool behind the counter with the kerosene lamp lit and the ledger closed in front of him, and the 47 letters stacked beside it, and he reached out and put his hand flat on the top envelope, the one marked 1979, and he did not open it. Not yet. But, for the first time, he understood that the building he had bought for $10 was not the inheritance. The inheritance was inside the envelope, and the envelope was going to be opened tomorrow. He came back to the depot at 5:20 in the morning. He had not slept. He had driven the Buick to Mount Olive at midnight and parked it in the usual spot. He had sat in the driver's seat with the ledger on his lap and the bundle of 47 letters on the passenger seat beside him. He had watched the sky go from black to gray to the pale color of a peach skin held up against a window. Then he had driven back out to Tarwell. He had unlocked the door. He had lit the lamp. He sat on the high stool behind the counter. He took the bottom envelope from the bundle, the earliest one, 1979. The paper inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, torn at the top edge. The handwriting was younger than the handwriting in the ledger. The slant was less practiced. Hollis Green had been 57 that year. Felicia, the letter began. My mother died yesterday morning. Your grandmother on her side, who you never knew. She was 81. Her name was Leslie Green. She made the best pound cake. She did not forgive my sister for going to Philadelphia and not coming back. She died waiting for a phone call that did not come. I am writing this to you because I do not have anybody else who shares the blood, and I needed to write it down for someone. I will not mail this. It would be unkind to put a stranger's grief on a 12-year-old child. But I needed to tell you, you exist in the world. That is the part I needed to write down. You exist in the world, and somewhere a great uncle you have never met is awake at 4 in the morning grieving his mother. Reuben set the letter down on the counter. He picked up the next one, 1991. Della Green had died in March of that year. Hollis had gone to the funeral in Philadelphia. It was the only time he had been north of the Mason-Dixon line since he stopped portering in TT-47. He had not introduced himself. He had stood across the street from the A.M. Zion Church on Diamond Street in his only good suit. He had watched the family come out. He had seen a young woman who looked 24 years old carry one corner of the casket because the family had run short of pallbearers. You looked like her? Hollis had written. You looked exactly like her. I had never seen you in my life, and I would have known you on a street in any city. Reuben turned that letter face down on the counter. He picked up the one from 2002. The handwriting had thinned slightly. Hollis was 80. Wendell called me at 6 this morning, the letter began. He said you had a boy. He said you named him Reuben. He said it was a hard birth, but you and the child are well. I have been sitting in the agent's chair at the depot since 7 o'clock. The depot is not a depot anymore. The line has been gone 16 years. I come here every Tuesday because the building is mine and because I do not know how else to spend a Tuesday. I am 80 years old, and I have a great nephew named Reuben. I do not know what to do with this information. I will write more when I do. Reuben sat very still. He read 3 more letters from the middle of the bundle, each one short, each one a kind of quiet update. Reuben started kindergarten this fall. Reuben is doing well in reading. Reuben is a quiet boy, Wendell says. The years trespassed in the margins. The handwriting got smaller. The paper got thinner. Then he picked up the last letter, the one from the top of the stack, the one from March of 2013, the 47th. The handwriting was thinner than in the earlier letters. The hand had gotten tired by 2013. 3 months later, Hollis Green would go into the nursing home in Edenton and would not come out. Reuben unfolded the single sheet. To the child who will come if a child comes. I am writing this in March of 2013. I am 90 years old. My doctor at the clinic in Edenton says I do not have very long. I have lived a great deal longer than my father did, and a great deal longer than I deserved when I was 20 and angry and certain the world owed me an apology. I knew your mother her whole life from a distance of about 300 miles. I never spoke to her. I never wrote to her. I told myself for 46 years that I was respecting my sister's decision. But the truth is closer to this. I was afraid that if I showed up, I would not be enough. A man who has waited too long to say a thing starts to believe he has nothing left to say. I was a Pullman porter for 5 years, from 1942 to 1947, on the Atlantic coastline between Tampa and New York. I was 20 when I started. The pay was $27.50 a month. The rest was tips. The rule was that every porter was called George, regardless of his name. I was called George by a great many men. I was called other things by some. One night in 1944 on the southbound out of Richmond, an old man in a Pullman compartment threw a glass of coffee at my chest. I had brought him a second pillow. He had wanted a third. The coffee was not hot enough to burn me. It ruined the only clean jacket I had. I made the bed in his compartment with hospital corners at 45 degrees, the way the Pullman manual required. I stood in the corridor afterward, and I cried for a minute and a half. Then I went to the next berth. Then I went to the one after that. There are two kinds of silence in this world, child. The kind that breaks you, and the kind that builds something. I have spent most of my life trying to tell the difference. I do not always know. If you are reading this, it means you came to a building I bought in 1962, with money I saved from 20 years of working the very depot you are sitting in. You bought it from the county for $10. That was on purpose. I stopped paying the property tax 3 years before I died, because I wanted the county to sell it cheap, and I wanted a young person with nothing to be able to buy it. I chose this way because I wanted the gift to require something of you. In a trust at First Citizens Bank in Greenville, there is $180,000 in your name. Mr. Calloway will handle the transfer. 2 parcels of land are deeded to the trust, one along the Cashie River and one in Roxabelle. And there is a storage unit in Edenton, paid through 2025, with the railroad things I collected for 60 years. An appraiser valued them at $148,000 in 2011. If you keep them, do not let them gather dust. There is something I should have told your mother in '88 about the man at the wool blankets at the market in Windsor go for $9 a pair in the fall. They are not as warm as they used to be, but they are honest blankets. Get one for the chair in the ticket window. The wind comes through the south wall on a cold night. Your great-uncle, by blood and otherwise. Hollis Green. Reuben read it through twice before he set it down. He folded it back along the original creases. He put it on top of the stack. He sat on the high stool behind the counter and looked through the iron grill at the empty waiting room. He had not opened that door for 46 years either. He drove to Greenville the next morning. The address Pastor Wendell had given him was a small brick building on 5th Street, off the Courthouse Square, 3 doors down from a barber shop. The sign says Calloway and Calloway, attorneys at law. The senior Calloway had died in 2019. The younger Calloway, whose name was Ellis, had taken over the practice. He was 34. He had a beard. He had grown to look older and it was not working. He met Reuben in a small conference room with a long oak table and 3 chairs. He had a manila folder open in front of him. He had been waiting for this meeting since 2014. He did not say so. Mr. Pickett. My father drew up the trust documents for Mr. Green in 2008. He updated them in 2011 and again in 2013. Are you familiar with the structure? It's straightforward. Mr. Green placed a sum of money and certain other assets into a trust with a contingent beneficiary. The contingency was that the depot at Tarwell would be acquired by a person of his choosing. He did not name that person. He named the act. He named the act. Yes. The trust language reads, and I am paraphrasing, the beneficiary shall be the natural person who acquires Lot 7B, Tarwell Township, by means of public tax sale. If nobody acquired it within 5 years of his death, the trust would have dissolved and the assets would have gone to Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church. We were 11 months from that deadline when you bought the property. Reuben sat with his hands flat on the table. Ellis Calloway considered the question. He had practiced this answer in his head a number of times over the past 3 years. He had not been sure he would get to use it. My father asked him the same question. Mr. Green said he wanted the person who got it to want it. He said a gift you have to put in somebody's hands isn't a gift, it's a transaction. He said he wanted the gift to be a door that opened only if you walked toward it. Reuben nodded once. He did not say anything. Ellis Calloway slid the manila folder across the table. There were a great many papers in it. A deed for 6.2 acres on the Cashie River. A deed for 11 acres of timber tract in Roxabelle. A brass key on a paper tag that said LJ Storage, Edenton, Unit 14. A single check made out to Reuben Pickett for $180,000.17. It took 20 minutes. There was no music. Reuben signed where Ellis Calloway told him to sign. He took the folder. He walked out of the office. He sat in the Buick LeSabre in the parking lot off 5th Street for a long time before he turned the key in the ignition. He did not cry. He did not call anyone. He drove back to Tarwell. Word of the inheritance got out within a week. Bertie County was 17,000 people. The woman behind the counter at the credit union in Windsor, where Reuben opened his first real checking account, was the cousin of the man who cut Garrick Whitaker's hair in Raleigh. Whitaker had asked the barber to keep an ear out for any news from down east. The barber had been keeping his ear out for 9 months. The Lincoln Navigator pulled into the gravel apron at the depot on a Wednesday afternoon in early March. Reuben was on the platform measuring a rotten board with a tape measure. He had a pencil behind his ear. He looked up. Garrick Whitaker got out of the Navigator. He was not smiling this time. He walked up the platform steps and stopped 6 feet from where Reuben was crouched. "Mr. Pickett, I had heard a rumor. I came down to see if it was true." Reuben stood up. He put the tape measure in his back pocket. "That your great-uncle, who I now understand was the previous owner, left you a substantial inheritance. I want to put a number on the table before any other developer in this region figures out what you are sitting on. $85,000. Cash. 10 days to close. The land alone." Whitaker stopped. He looked at Reuben for a long moment. He looked at the depot behind him. He looked at the iron grill of the ticket window through the open door. He took a breath the way a man does when he is about to say something he has not planned to say. "Why? I have been in this business 21 years. I have made offers on 100 properties like this one. I have never been turned down on the second offer when the first was 40,000. So tell me, why?" Reuben put his hand on the doorframe of the depot. The wood was warm where the afternoon sun had hit it. "Somebody already paid for this building," he said. "They just paid in something other than money." Garrick Whitaker did not answer right away. He looked at the doorframe. He looked at Reuben's hand on it. He looked at the gravel under his own shoes. He walked back down the platform steps. Reuben thought he was leaving, but Whitaker did not get into the Lincoln. He sat down on the bottom step of the platform with his back to the depot and his elbows on his knees. He stayed there. 5 minutes, maybe 6. A truck went by on Sycamore Road. The kudzu on the south wall moved a little in the wind. Then Whitaker stood up. He walked back up the steps. He went into the waiting room. He went behind the counter. He picked up the business card he had left on the brass bell 3 weeks before. He looked at it for a second. He tore it in half along the long axis, slowly, deliberately, so the tear was clean. He placed the 2 halves on the wooden counter, one above the other. He turned around. He did not look at Reuben on the way out. He walked down the platform, got into the Lincoln Navigator, and pulled out of the gravel apron and turned north on Sycamore Road. The dust hung in the air for a long minute after he was gone. He had not understood. He had only understood that he had not understood, and that was something. Pastor Wendell came by at 6 that evening. Reuben had set a hot plate on the wooden counter and was heating up a small pot of collard greens Miss Augusta had sent over Sunday. He had a folding chair on the public side of the ticket window and another on the agent's side. A piece of plywood across 2 sawhorses made a temporary table in the middle of the waiting room. Pastor Wendell sat down at the table. Reuben put a plate in front of him, cornbread from a tin, a glass of sweet tea they ate. They did not talk about the trust. They did not talk about Whitaker. They talked about Eunice. Pastor Wendell had married Hollis to her in October of 1953. The Saturday had been so hot that the bride's mother fainted halfway through the vows. 3 women in the choir had taken turns fanning her with the church programs. Pastor Wendell, then a young deacon helping the senior pastor, had pretended not to notice. They talked about the way Eunice taught 2nd grade at Tarwell Consolidated for 31 years. She refused to retire until the year the school district closed her school and boozed the children to Windsor. They talked about how Hollis used to bring his wife a peach from the trees behind the depot every July 15th. That was their anniversary. The year Eunice died in 2006, the peach trees did not produce a single fruit. Hollis had stood out behind the depot in August, looking at the bare branches. He had shaken his head and said to nobody in particular, "They know, they knew." Pastor Wendell finished his cornbread. He folded his napkin and set it beside his plate. "You doing all right, son?" "Yes, sir, I think so." "That's enough for tonight." He stood up. He carried his plate over to the makeshift sink Reuben had set up in the freight room. He washed it. He set it on the drain board. He came back into the waiting room and put on his coat. He stopped at the door. Hollis used to lock this door at 8 o'clock every night. Sunday through Friday, he'd come back at 6 the next morning. 40 years. Even after the LIN shut down, he kept coming. Because the building was his, and because he believed somebody would come for it eventually. Pastor Wendell put his hat on. "Good night, son." Reuben sat at the makeshift table. The kerosene lamp burned slow. He did not turn on the flashlight. He sat in the dark for a long time. The depot was not empty. 3 things had become true at once. Reuben was old enough at 20 to know that you cannot hold 3 true things at the same time without changing the shape of what you used to be. The first was that Hollis Green, a man he had never met, had known he existed and had loved him from across 46 years of careful distance. The second was that this love had been a kind of family, even though no one would have called it that. And the third was the thing he could not say to himself yet without his throat closing. That his mother had not been alone, either. That somewhere in Philadelphia, in a second-floor walk-up, 300 miles from a man who had been writing her letters he never mailed, Felicia Green Pickett had been carried in silence by her uncle. She had not known it, but she had been carried. He did not know yet what to do with that. He sat in the dark a long time. After a while, he got up and locked the door. For the first time since he had bought the building. 22 months later, the depot at Tarwell had a new roof. Dark red corrugated tin, the same kind the building had worn in 1907. The platform boards had been replaced where they were rotten and cleaned and sealed where they were sound. The linseed oil Reuben had rubbed into them in August of 2017 had cured the wood to the color of dark honey. The kudzu on the south wall had grown back the previous summer. Reuben had not pulled it. He had thought about it. He had decided to let it be. Inside, the iron grill of the ticket window was still there. The wooden counter was still there. The carving under the lip of the counter, 4 inches above the floor, still read HG. For 1247, in letters that had darkened from another year of palm oil and dust. The high stool was still there. The brass bell had been polished once by Marlin in October, but there were computers now. 3 desktops along the long table on the south wall of the waiting room. There was a metal sign bolted to the door that said, Tarwell Depot, Workshop. Tuesday through Friday, 9 to 6. Saturdays, 10 to 2. There was a coffee pot that Miss Augusta refilled 3 times a day on the days she was there. There were 2 folding chairs by the wood stove, which Reuben had replaced with a new one from the hardware store in Windsor for $240 in the fall of 2017. The stove had a sticker on the side that said EPA certified. Reuben had put the sticker on himself. He did not want to be running afoul of anybody. He no longer slept in the Buick. He rented a 1-bedroom apartment over the dry goods store in Tarwell for $220 a month. He had not sold the Buick. He drove it on Tuesdays. He kept it because it had been his great-uncle Earl's, and because some things you do not sell even when you can afford to replace them. He taught small engine repair on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Marlon Tate taught electrical Wednesday afternoons. The Wi-Fi was free 4 days a week. The router was on the back wall of the freight room where the platform scale used to be. The scale was still there too. Reuben had moved it to the corner. It was not a thing you got rid of. The telegraph nook on the west wall had been converted into a reading room. Marlon had built bookshelves into the alcove on a Saturday in November of 2017. From white pine he had cut himself off the timber tract in Roxabelle. The shelves held about 300 books. Most of them had come from Patricia Lyles at the public library in Windsor. She had retired in May. She had brought down 2 carloads of donated paperbacks she had saved from the discard pile. There were 2 armchairs in the reading room. They had come from a yard sale in Lewiston for $30. The freight room was now the garage practice space. 3 workbenches, an oil drip pan in the middle of the floor, a parts cleaner along the north wall, hand tools on a pegboard behind each bench. The pegboard had outlines drawn in black marker so the tools went back where they came from. Reuben had drawn the outlines himself. It had taken a whole afternoon. On a small shelf in the corner of the ticket booth area, behind the wooden counter, there was a glass case. Inside the case was the daily train sheet ledger, open to the page for April 20, 1986. The pencil line in the margin was visible through the glass. Felicia's birthday. She is 19 years old today. Beside the ledger, in a neat bundle held with a cotton ribbon Augusta had tied for him, were the 47 letters. Above the case, screwed into the wall, was a small brass plaque, 3 lines of letters. Hollis Green, station agent, 1922 to 2014. He kept the lights on. There was no display about the Pullman Porter years. There was no sign explaining the line had run from 1907 to 1986. There was a historical photograph of Atlantic Coastline locomotive number 1604, which had pulled the first train into Tarwell on May 11, 1907. People asked. Reuben told them. He told the Pullman Porter story to one person at a time when one person at a time asked. That was the way he had decided to tell it. Saturdays, the depot opened at 10. Miss Augusta drove over from Tarwell, where she still lived above the closed post office, and she sat in the reading room and taught 3 children to read. 2 of them were the granddaughters of the man who used to own the hardware store on Granville. One was the son of a woman who worked the night shift at the chicken plant in Lewiston. The reading lessons went from 10 to noon. Miss Augusta did not charge anything. She had told Reuben once that teaching children to read was the thing her own mother had wanted to do and had not lived long enough to do. She did it because she was alive and her mother was not. Pastor Wendell dropped by on Saturday mornings with biscuits from Deacon Carver's wife at Mount Olive. Marlon and his cousin Eliza, who was studying nursing at Pitt Community College, came on Saturday afternoons and ran a free clinic for blood pressure checks. People came. Some brought food, some sat and talked, some did not say much. A 9-year-old boy named Travis Cooper started coming in March of 2018. He came at first because his cousin had told him there was free Wi-Fi at the depot. He played games on the desktop computers for 2 weeks and did not speak to anybody. In April, he started watching Reuben work on the small engine bench. In May, he asked one question about the spring inside a carburetor. In June, he asked another. By August, he was bringing his own broken weed eater for Reuben to teach him how to fix. Reuben did not save Travis Cooper. Travis was not in need of saving. Travis just came. That is the way it goes when the building has a door and the door has been left open. A man came in on a Friday afternoon in August. He was of 60, white, retired Navy by the look of him. He had been driving from Norfolk down to Wilmington and had stopped because he saw the sign at the road. He pours himself a coffee from the pot. Augusta kept full and dropped $1 in the jar where the change went. He stood at the glass case for a long time looking at the ledger and the letters and the brass plaque. After a while he came over to the counter where Reuben was rebuilding a carburetor at the work surface. "Excuse me, son, who was Hollis Green?" Reuben put down the screwdriver. He wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at the man. "He was the station agent here 40 years. He was my great-uncle. Before he was the station agent, he was a Pullman porter for 5 years on the Atlantic coastline. Tampa to New York. My father was a conductor on the seaboard, Boston down to Atlanta, 43 years on the rails, died in '99. Then you know. I know what they did to porters. My father saw it. He told me once a story about a boarder named Walter in 1956 who got a tooth knocked out for asking a passenger to put a lit cigar out in a non-smoking berth. The passenger filed a complaint about Walter. Walter got a written warning. He kept the job because he had 4 children. The man looked at the plaque again. He read the 3 lines. He kept the lights on. That's a hell of a thing to put on a man's grave. That's not his grave, Reuben said. He's buried at Mount Olive over in Windsor. This is just where he worked. Same thing, the man said. He finished his coffee. He shook Reuben's hand. He went out to his car and drove south on Sycamore Road. Reuben watched him go. Then he went back to the carburetor. The spring inside the float bowl had come loose. It was a small fix. The dog had wandered up to the depot in May of 2017, 2 weeks after Reuben had moved into the apartment over the dry goods store. Pit and Labrador mixed, mostly white, with brown patches on his ears old enough that his muzzle was already gray. He had limped. He had refused to leave. Reuben had named him conductor because Marlon had said the dog acted like he was checking tickets when he walked around the platforms sniffing at people's shoes. Conductor had slept inside the depot every night from May 2017 to August 2018. He died on a Wednesday afternoon in the garage practice space, lying on a folded blanket beside the workbench while Reuben was teaching Travis how to clean a spark plug. He did not make any noise. Reuben noticed because Travis noticed. Travis was 9 years old and had been around enough trouble to know what stillness meant. Reuben buried him under the sweet gum tree behind the freight room. Marlon helped dig. They put a small piece of pine board at the head of the grave. Reuben carved into it with the same pocket knife he carried for the small jobs around the workshop. He had stayed when no one asked. Travis Cooper came by the grave for 3 weeks after that and brought a flower each time. The flowers were not the same kind because Travis took them from different yards. Nobody said anything about that. Reuben tried to find his father once. He paid $40 for a one-month subscription to a genealogy website. He typed in what he knew, which was not much. There were 6 men in Philadelphia in the right age range with the right first name and a last name that approximated. He looked at each of their pictures. None of them looked back at him. He let the subscription lapse at the end of the month. He did not write to the Greens in Philadelphia. Deleg's Green had 3 children besides Felicia, all of them alive, all of them in their 40s and 50s now, all of them Reuben's cousins by blood. He had their names, he had their addresses. Ellis Calloway had passed them along after the trust closed. He had started a letter once in October in the apartment over the dry goods store. He had sat at the small kitchen table with a sheet of lined notebook paper and a pencil, and he had written, "To my cousins in Philadelphia who do not know me." He had gotten as far as that line. He had looked at it for half an hour. Then he had folded the paper and put it in a drawer in the bureau by the window. The drawer also held his mother's Timex with the cracked face, which he no longer wore but did not want to put somewhere he could not see it every day. The folded paper had stayed in the drawer for 9 months. He told himself he might finish it. He told himself maybe next year. He told himself the same thing the year after that. Garrick Whitaker never came back. The Lincoln Navigator did not appear on Sycamore Road again. The Coastal Storage Holdings letterhead did not arrive in the mailbox. Reuben did not know if Whitaker was still in real estate or if he had gone into something else. He thought about him sometimes. He thought about the way Whitaker had sat on the bottom step of the platform for 5 minutes and said nothing. He thought it was probably the closest Whitaker had ever come to praying. Some things did not close. Some things were not supposed to. A Tuesday evening in November of 2018, 5:47 in the afternoon. The sun was down. The light through the south window was the last gray of dusk. The workshop had cleared out at 5. Marlin had locked the garage practice door behind him. Travis Cooper had finished his weed-eater repair and his mother had picked him up at 4:15. The 3 desktop computers were dark. The coffee pot was empty. Augusta had gone home with a Tupperware of leftover chili Marlin's wife had made. Reuben walked through the building once. He turned off the light in the freight room. He turned off the light in the telegraph reading room. He turned off the light in the waiting room last. He stood at the ticket window and looked at the glass case in the corner. The brass plaque caught the last gray light from the south window. He kept the lights on. He took his coat from the peg by the door. He stopped at the threshold. He looked back at the counter, the high stool, the carving under the lip he could not see from where he stood but knew was there. HG 412-47, the brass bell, the iron grill. He stepped out onto the platform. He locked the door behind him. The key was small and brass. The cold of November came through his coat. He stood on the gravel apron for a minute. The Buick was parked where it always was. The kudzu on the south wall had gone copper for the season. He walked to the car. He did not start the engine for a long time. A man can carry someone in silence for 40 years and still call it being family.